The sun beat down mercilessly on the stretch of desert highway that seemed to extend infinitely in both directions. The shimmer of heat rising from the asphalt created an illusion of water in the distance, a cruel mirage for two men stranded in the middle of nowhere. Jake checked his phone for the 20th time in the past hour, hoping for even a single bar of service to appear. Nothing. He sighed heavily and ran his fingers through his dark, neatly trimmed hair, already damp with sweat despite the car's shade. "Any luck?" Ryan asked from where he was sprawled across the back seat, his lanky frame somehow managing to look comfortable despite the circumstances. His blonde curls were pushed back with sunglasses, and unlike Jake, he seemed almost amused by their predicament. "Does it look like I'm having any luck?" Jake snapped, immediately regretting his tone. "Sorry. No, still nothing. We might as well be on Mars for all the connectivity we have out here." This wasn't how their road trip was supposed to go. Jake had planned everything meticulously, as he always did. The rental car had been reserved weeks in advance, a sensible mid-sized sedan with excellent fuel efficiency. The route to Ryan's sister's wedding in Phoenix had been mapped out with alternate paths in case of traffic or construction. Jake had even packed an emergency kit with water, snacks, and basic tools. But no amount of planning could have prepared them for the sudden clunk, the plume of smoke, and the gradual loss of power that left them stranded on this desolate stretch of Nevada highway. What made it worse was that this trip was supposed to be a chance for Jake to finally connect with Ryan outside of their usual friend group. They'd known each other for nearly 2 years, ever since they were introduced at a mutual friend's birthday party. Jake, an architectural engineer who lived by his calendar and to-do lists, had been immediately drawn to Ryan's carefree spirit. Ryan, a freelance photographer who chased beautiful moments across the country, seemed to find Jake's structured approach to life endlessly fascinating. They'd orbited each other in their social circle, their banter always carrying an undercurrent of something more, but neither had taken the leap to explore it further. When Ryan mentioned needing to get to his sister's wedding and lamenting the cost of flights, Jake had surprised himself by offering to drive him. "We could make a road trip out of it," he'd suggested, heart pounding as the words left his mouth. Ryan's face had lit up with a smile that made the risk worth it. "That sounds like an adventure," he'd replied, and Jake had spent the next 3 weeks planning the perfect journey. Now, 3 hours into being stranded, that perfect journey was quickly becoming a disaster. The temperature outside had climbed well past 100 degrees, and even with the windows cracked, the inside of the car was becoming unbearable. The rental company's roadside assistants had promised to send help, but the dispatcher had been vague about how long it would take. "Someone will be there as soon as possible," she'd said before the call dropped, which wasn't exactly reassuring. "We should probably conserve our water," Jake said, eyeing their dwindling supply. They had 4 bottles left between them, and no idea how long they'd be waiting. "Small sips only." Ryan sat up, his expression becoming more serious. "You're right. How are we doing on food? We have those protein bars, some trail mix, and those horrible gas station sandwiches you insisted on buying," Jake replied, allowing a small smile. Even in crisis, Ryan's questionable food choices could amuse him. "Hey, don't knock gas station cuisine until you've been properly stranded with it," Ryan defended, reaching into the cooler that was rapidly becoming less cool. "Want half?" Jake wrinkled his nose, but accepted the offering. They ate in silence for a few minutes, the reality of their situation settling over them like the relentless desert sun. The highway remained empty. They hadn't seen another vehicle pass by in over an hour. "Maybe we should try walking to find help," Ryan suggested after finishing his sandwich half. Jake shook his head firmly. "Absolutely not. It's too hot, and we don't know how far we'd need to go. The last sign for a town was at least 20 miles back. We're better off waiting here where we have shade and what's left of our supplies." Ryan nodded, conceding the point. "Always the practical one, aren't you?" "One of us has to be," Jake replied, but there was no bite to his words. In truth, he admired Ryan's willingness to take risks, even if it terrified him sometimes. As the afternoon wore on, the heat became increasingly oppressive. They took turns sitting outside the car to check for approaching vehicles, but the effort seemed futile. The vast desert landscape stretched around them, beautiful in its harsh way, but utterly indifferent to their plight. During one of his turns on watch, Jake found himself staring at Ryan, who had stripped down to a tank top but was still wearing his jeans. Sweat glistened on his tanned arms, and despite their dire circumstances, Jake couldn't help but appreciate the view. "You know," Jake said, breaking the silence that had fallen between them, "you might be more comfortable if you weren't wearing those heavy jeans. It's got to be at least 110 degrees out here now." Ryan raised an eyebrow, a mischievous grin spreading across his face. "Why, Jake, are you suggesting I take my pants off? How forward of you." Jake felt his face flush, and he was grateful that his already heat-reddened skin would hide his embarrassment. "I'm suggesting you might be cooler in shorts. But by all means, suffer if you prefer." Ryan laughed, the sound surprisingly refreshing in the stifling air. "I didn't pack shorts. Some of us didn't prepare for every possible scenario." He gestured to Jake's meticulously packed suitcase, which included clothing options for every conceivable weather condition. "Well, clothes actually trap heat, you know," Jake said, falling back on facts to mask his discomfort. "Especially dark, heavy fabrics like those jeans. In extreme heat, less is sometimes more when it comes to staying cool." Ryan's eyes lit up with interest. "Is that so? And where did you learn this survival tip, Boy Scout?" "I read a lot," Jake replied defensively, "and it's just basic science. Your body generates heat, and clothing can prevent that heat from dissipating, especially if there's no breeze." Ryan considered this for a moment, then suddenly stood up. "All right then, Professor. Let's test your theory." Before Jake could respond, Ryan was unbuttoning his jeans and sliding them down his legs, revealing a pair of bright blue boxer briefs that left little to the imagination. Jake's mouth went dry. This was not what he had intended with his helpful suggestion, but he couldn't bring himself to look away as Ryan kicked his jeans aside and stretched dramatically. "You know what? You're right. I do feel cooler already," Ryan declared, seemingly unself-conscious about standing in the middle of the desert in his underwear. "Your turn." "What? No, I'm fine," Jake stammered, suddenly very aware of his own khaki shorts and polo shirt, his standard road trip attire. "Come on, Jake. If you're going to lecture me about the science of heat dispersion, you should be willing to put it into practice," Ryan challenged, his eyes twinkling with amusement. "Unless you're afraid I'll see something you don't want me to see." The implication hung in the air between them, charged with possibilities. Jake hesitated, caught between his natural caution and the undeniable pull he felt toward Ryan. Maybe it was the heat, or the strange intimacy of being stranded together, but something made Jake reach for the hem of his polo shirt. "Fine," he said, pulling the shirt over his head in one smooth motion. "But I'm keeping my shorts on." Ryan's playful expression shifted slightly as his eyes traveled over Jake's exposed chest. "Fair enough," he said, his voice a touch lower than before. "Though I have to say, you've been hiding quite the physique under those button-ups all this time." Jake felt a flush that had nothing to do with the desert heat. He'd always been fit. Running and swimming were his preferred methods of working off stress, but he'd never thought of himself as particularly noteworthy. The appreciation in Ryan's gaze made him reconsider. "It's just from swimming," he said modestly, unsure how to handle the compliment. "Well, whatever it is, it's working for you," Ryan replied, settling back against the car. The new dynamic between them was palpable, a tension that wasn't entirely uncomfortable. As the afternoon stretched into evening, their conversation flowed more freely than it ever had before. Perhaps it was the vulnerability of their situation, or maybe it was the gradual shedding of pretenses along with their clothes. But Jake found himself opening up about things he rarely discussed, his parents' expectations that he'd follow in his father's footsteps as a corporate lawyer, his decision to pursue architecture instead, his struggle to find balance between his natural inclination for order and his desire for more spontaneity in his life. Ryan, in turn, shared his own stories, growing up as the free-spirited middle child between two high-achieving siblings, finding his passion for photography during a particularly dark period after college, his fear that his nomadic lifestyle might prevent him from ever forming lasting connections. "That's why I admire you, you know," Ryan admitted as the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the desert floor. "You've built this solid life for yourself. You know who you are and what you want." Jake laughed softly. "That's an illusion. Half the time I'm terrified I'm missing out on something better because I'm too afraid to take risks." He glanced at Ryan, allowing himself a moment of complete honesty. "That's why I admire you. You just leap. You see something beautiful or exciting, and you go for it." Their eyes met, and for a moment, Jake thought Ryan might close the distance between them. Instead, Ryan looked away, focusing on the horizon. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm just running," he said quietly. "If all this movement is just a way to avoid standing still long enough to face what I really want." "And what do you really want?" Jake asked, his heart pounding in his chest. Before Ryan could answer, a distant rumble caught their attention. They both turned to see a tow truck approaching from the direction they'd been heading. Relief flooded through Jake, mingled with an odd sense of disappointment that their time alone was coming to an end. "Looks like our rescue has arrived," Ryan said, scrambling to pull his jeans back on. Jake reached for his shirt, suddenly self-conscious again. The tow truck driver, a weathered man in his 60s who introduced himself as Earl, seemed unsurprised to find them stranded. "Happens more often than you'd think," he said as he hooked up their rental car. "Folks underestimate how tough this stretch can be on vehicles. You boys are lucky I was heading back this way. Could have been out here all night otherwise." The nearest town with a garage was 30 miles ahead, and Earl offered them a ride in his truck. Squeezed into the cab with Earl between them, Jake was acutely aware of Ryan's presence, of the confessions and near moments they'd shared in the desert heat. The town, when they reached it, was little more than a collection of buildings clustered around a main street. The garage was closed for the night, but there was a small motel nearby where they could stay until morning. Earl dropped them off with a promise to have the mechanic look at their car first thing. The motel was a relic from another era, with a neon sign that flickered erratically in rooms that opened directly to the parking lot. The night clerk barely looked up from his magazine as he handed them a key, singular, not plural. "Only got one room left," he said disinterestedly. "Two queens, though." Jake and Ryan exchanged a glance, both remembering their state of undress just hours earlier. "That works," Ryan said, taking the key. The room was basic but clean, with two beds separated by a nightstand, a small bathroom, and a window air conditioner that rattled but mercifully worked. After the heat of the day, the cool air was blissful. "I'm going to shower," Jake announced, needing a moment to collect his thoughts. The intimacy of their desert confessions felt different now, in this motel room with its implicit privacy. The shower helped clear his head, the cool water washing away the day's sweat and dust. When he emerged, wrapped in a towel because he hadn't thought to bring his clothes into the bathroom, Ryan was sitting on one of the beds, staring at his phone. "Signal's back," Ryan said, looking up. His eyes lingered on Jake's chest for a moment before returning to his face. "I texted my sister to let her know we might be delayed." "Good thinking," Jake replied, awkwardly clutching his towel. "I should probably call the rental company too." Ryan nodded, then stood up. "I'll take my shower now." He paused as he passed Jake, close enough that Jake could smell the desert sun on his skin. "For what it's worth, I think you were right about the clothes-trapping heat thing. I felt much better after, adjusting my attire." There was something in his voice that made Jake's pulse quicken. "Just basic science," he managed to say. Ryan smiled, a slow, deliberate curve of his lips. "Sometimes the most basic things are the ones we overlook." He disappeared into the bathroom, leaving Jake to wonder if they were still talking about temperature regulation. After they had both showered and changed into clean clothes, they ventured out to find food. The town had limited options, but they discovered a small diner that was still open, its windows glowing warmly in the desert night. They slid into a booth, suddenly shy with each other after the intensity of the day. The waitress, a woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner, took their orders and left them with 2 glasses of ice water. Jake drank his gratefully, still feeling the effects of their time in the heat. "So," Ryan said after a moment of silence, "that wasn't exactly the road trip adventure I was expecting." Jake laughed softly. "No, not quite according to plan. But you know what?" Ryan continued, leaning forward slightly. "I wouldn't change it. Well, maybe the part where we could have died of heat stroke in the desert, but the rest." He trailed off, his eyes meeting Jake's with an intensity that made the air between them feel charged. "The rest?" Jake prompted, hardly daring to breathe. Ryan reached across the table, his fingers brushing against Jake's. "The rest was kind of perfect. Getting to know you, the real you, not just the guy who makes lists and plans everything to the minute. Seeing you let your guard down a little." Jake turned his hand over, allowing Ryan's fingers to intertwine with his. "It was easier than I expected," he admitted. "Being with you makes me feel like maybe I don't have to control everything all the time." Their food arrived, momentarily breaking the connection, but something had shifted between them. As they ate, their conversation flowed easily, punctuated by lingering glances and occasional touches that seemed both casual and deliberate. By the time they returned to the motel, The night had cooled considerably, a stark contrast to the day's heat. They stood outside their room door, neither making a move to unlock it, as if crossing that threshold would require a decision about what came next. So, Jake said finally, according to the mechanic's initial assessment, they should have the car fixed by tomorrow afternoon. We'll still make it to the wedding with a day to spare. Ryan nodded, but he seemed distracted. Jake, he said suddenly, when we were out there today, and I asked what you were afraid of missing out on. What were you thinking about? The question hung between them, an invitation to honesty that Jake couldn't ignore. You, he said simply. I was thinking about you, and all the times I wanted to tell you how I felt, but couldn't find the courage. Ryan's expression softened. And how do you feel? Instead of answering with words, Jake closed the distance between them, his hand coming up to cup Ryan's face as he pressed their lips together. The kiss was gentle at first, a question, but when Ryan responded by pulling him closer, it deepened into something more certain. When they finally broke apart, Ryan was smiling, his eyes bright in the dim light of the motel walkway. I've been waiting for you to do that for about 1.5 years, he confessed. Jake laughed, feeling lighter than he had in years. Sorry for the delay. I was busy making sure all my ducks were in a row first. Well, Ryan said, reaching for the room key. Some things are worth waiting for. The next day, as they continued their journey in the repaired rental car, the desert landscape seemed different somehow, less harsh, more beautiful in its vastness. They drove with the windows down, despite the heat, their hands linked between the seats. You know, Ryan said thoughtfully, I was thinking about what you said yesterday, about clothes trapping heat. Jake glanced at him, raising an eyebrow. Oh, I'm just saying, we might need to conduct further experiments to fully test your theory, Ryan replied, his tone serious but his eyes dancing with mischief. For science, of course. Jake laughed, feeling a sense of possibility opening up before them like the endless road ahead. For science, he agreed, squeezing Ryan's hand. Though I should warn you, I'm very thorough in my research methods. I'm counting on it, Ryan said, and the promise in his voice made Jake press the accelerator just a little harder, eager for whatever adventures awaited them, both on this road trip and beyond. As they drove toward Phoenix, toward the wedding that had been the original purpose of their journey, Jake realized that sometimes the best moments in life were the unplanned ones, the breakdowns, the detours, the unexpected confessions in the desert heat. And while he would always be the type to pack an emergency kit and map out the route in advance, perhaps there was room in his carefully ordered life for a little spontaneity, a little risk, a little love that defied planning. The desert stretched endlessly around them, a testament to beauty that could exist in the harshest conditions. Ahead, the road shimmered with heat, but this time, the mirage seemed to promise something real, a future they would discover together, 1 mile at a time. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Jake glanced at Ryan and felt a certainty he'd never experienced before. Whatever came next, they would face it together, prepared or not, planned or unexpected. And somehow, that knowledge made even the prospect of breaking down in the desert again seem like an adventure worth having. Total _char_count, 18,541.